we're here to talk about snowboarding, right?
Yes, of course. Snowboarding and Dungeons and Dragons and, oh my goodness, what else? Tequila.
Oh, yeah.
Welcome to Literary Lushes with your host, Samantha.
And Megan.
And today we are talking about the book Heaven's River by Dennis E. Taylor. It is the latest book in the Bobiverse series. And we have Dennis here with us today. Welcome, Dennis.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, we're glad that you can come back and join us again.
He keeps coming back again and again. And it makes me so happy. And I'm also like, I hope he's feeling okay that he agrees every time.
I'm coming back for the free drinks.
Oh, okay.
Why do you think I stick around, So,
yeah.
Speaking of drinks, the drink we created for this book, we called it the Skippies. We thought that would be a nice, appropriate name. And per your request, we made it tequila based. So it is a tequila based drink with some ginger ale and some juice, and all the flavors melded together really deliciously, actually. So
you're going to have to let Craig Allenson know, too. I'm sure he'd like to know that there's a drink named after Skippy.
Yeah, we were like, what should we call it? We're like, the Skippies.
Skippies. Everybody will get it.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I always read the acknowledgments of the book because I feel like it gives you a good flavor about what you're about to get into. And I laughed at the first sentence of your acknowledgments, Dennis. So thank you for that. Because it says something about like writing a book isn't done in a vacuum, and you were like, well, that's very well, because otherwise I'd be dead. And I'm like, excellent.
Already sets the tone for the book.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that like subtle humor going through, and I would just read it and chuckle to myself like, oh, Bob and their inner monologues with themselves of silliness, especially while they were on Quinlan. So thank you for that.
So my first note was, it started, like as I was listening to it, I started writing notes. I'm so proud of myself because I usually never write notes when I'm listening, but I was like writing as I'm listening. And I noticed it's like right off the bat, they're like, there's already over 1,000. Then there's over this many, then over this many. And I was like, oh my gosh, poor Dennis. He has over so many Bobs. He has to come up with these names and then later factions and all that different stuff. And I was just like, oh my gosh. And then I think at some point, and as they kept cloning from the clones and going down over 20 generations.
It's a lot of Bobs.
It's a lot of Bobs. And then the Bobs stopped being Bob-like. They started
replicant drift.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a neat little twist, how they were, they just weren't Bobs anymore. And in fact, I think the one
Starfleet,
during the thing that started, you called him Pissant before he knew what his name was.
Yeah.
And Jeremy or Morlock, and he just kept bugging the original Bob, and like he was just like, what the hell, dude? Like, you're me. You should not be you should be aligning your thoughts along with me. So I thought that was a very neat and interesting twist. And was there any like something that made you like, yeah, I'm just gonna make them completely different from?
The writing process is kind of iterative in that, and this is probably true to a different extent for different writers, but for me, I tend to write a very linear story to begin with, not a whole lot of character development, not a whole lot of emotion. Everybody's very even-tempered and says the right things, and and very understanding and stuff. And then I go back through and I start to ramp things up, or in some cases suppress things, but usually ramp things up. So yeah, Jeremy got more and more irritating over several edits.
I loved it. I was like, oh, it's so annoying. And that's funny because it's yourself, but it's like such a later generation that, and then he's like even remarked on their clothing about how it was like basically going to a cosplay.
Yeah, I got
without
really
the
good
Wookiees
about that.
That was one of my other notes, but anyway.
You have the Skippies, you have Starfleet, you have the original Bobs, you have the Gamers. I might be missing a couple.
Well, there's the board cosplayers. I don't know if you...
Yep.
caught them. Yeah, I didn't. I tried to avoid giving the impression that I was naming all of them because I want to leave that open ended, and more will develop anyway.
Some fan fiction.
Do you think
Yeah.
we'll ever get to meet Robbie or Bobby? Robbie.
I think so. There's no reason why not. And in fact, now that one Bob has drifted to that extent, more will.
And speaking of the replicant drift, I also liked how I call them the original Bobs, but they're not really original. They're just, you know.
They're so friendly and clicky.
I know, they're their own little clique. They're like the Heathers, you know? And I like how they even get back to their quote unquote, like, original directive of going to explore. And they're like, oh yeah, we did kind of get completely distracted by babysitting humans. And, you know, maybe we should.
Yeah. Not to mention that they've about had it with the way things have been going.
I don't blame them. I feel like I would have just been like,
without throwing out any huge spoilers. Yeah, I don't really blame the Bobs for wanting to get out of Dodge.
No.
Well, if you remember back to the beginning of book one, Bob was a bit of a, I don't want to say socially awkward, but he wasn't a social butterfly. He wasn't the type of person that liked going to parties. He mentions right at the beginning of the first book that he'd be happy to just sit in a room with his dad for half an hour and watch TV and not say a word. So the whole thing with tens of thousands of Bobs and going in all these directions, and, you know, the human colonies getting so big and ornery and all going in their directions, it's like Earth all over again, right?
Yes.
But he wants out.
I thought it was a very interesting mind thinking thing about how Bridget didn't want to clone, not only because of her believing in the souls, and then at which I think Bob was like, I almost said something like, well, you know, you're not the original Bridget either, so technically you wouldn't be the one with the soul. But he was like, I'm going to bite my tongue. And I'm like, oh, look, he's learning. So he's even evolving a little. And then,
and you saw that later on Quinlan too.
Yeah.
When they were arguing about the administrator and how it becomes this almost godlike entity. And he's like, I'm just going to keep my beak shut.
But I thought it was really interesting about how she also didn't want to become a clone because she didn't want the Bobs to think she was like the Barbie to their Ken. Like she wasn't there to be made to be their wives. And I thought that was, and she held strong for a long, like for the whole, I was just like, wow, I'm impressed.
I mean, because also she would just have all of Bridget's memories, so she would.
Right. So I thought that was a really neat look at it from another point of view of why she didn't want to clone, other than just the soul thing. Just being like, I don't want to be just the designated bride for
the VR mail order bride.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, well, the issue of being the other Bridget would have also, I think, been very high on her mind, you know, of not being able to go home.
Right. I did like how you brought that whole aspect in of like the soul, and you know, if you replicate, you know, what does your replicant have a soul? Is it a different soul than yours? And then especially for the humans who become you know, a VR entity, it's like, is that still you? Because it's technically like physically not you. And it was a good brain twister, Dennis. Do you have a specific point of view on it, or were you just throwing it out there to see what everybody else would think?
I hadn't thought it through to that point until I was writing it, but it does kind of make sense. There are other books that have sort of touched on this thing. The Light of Other Days by Stephen Baxter and Arthur C. Clarke. Right at the end of the book, it just does a right angle turn from the rest of the book. And I think he just threw that in because he liked the idea. But right at the end of the book, the descendants of humanity revive the entire human race from all time kind of thing. And it's the same kind of idea where the quantum signature that is the person never really goes away. You just give it another place to live and poof, they're awake again. Well, look up dualism as regards souls, and one of the arguments against souls is the idea of dualism. But a quantum signature as a soul takes care of that. It just explains it. It's not a problem. So
with science, anything is possible.
I'm going to start my own religion now.
Sign me
I was
up.
going to say, sign us up. We'll be the disciples of Dennis.
Yeah.
Then you get tax write-off.
Yeah, right.
And we'll have tequila shooters at church.
Oh my gosh. I will be there.
You'd have a very high attendance rate, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, and there'll be rockin' services too.
You get a lot of donations that way too. Like, oh, is this a 5 or
open,
50?
Open
You know
bar,
what? Here we go.
Tips only.
Yeah.
I also like that in this one we saw a lot more use of the manis and their versatility. And I even liked how there was talk about letting humans use the manis while they're still alive. Just because obviously as humans can get ornery if we're feeling left out. So I liked that idea. And I mean,
because you would do it.
I totally would do it.
Well, that's that Bruce Willis movie, Surrogates. And the whole thing is based around that. One of the problems I have writing the Bobiverse is trying to rein in the level of technology, because I don't want the whole Bobiverse to advance to the point where we can't identify with it. There have been some science fiction books that I've read where the society is so changed, it's so different, it's so absolutely metamorphosized by the technology that they might as well be aliens. and it's very difficult for the reader to empathize or sympathize with somebody's issue with the food replicator when you don't even know how it works. So I've tended to keep the technology down, but I can't make it static. So there's going to be changes. There's going to be, they've introduced replicant preserves or reserves, around stars, and they're starting to resuscitate people who were frozen for medical issues. And now we're going to get manis. And there's going to be other things too. But I still need to try to keep the society looking as understandable as possible.
I also really like, Dennis, one of the factions, the gamer faction.
I knew you would. Every time I read it, I was like, Samantha's going to be flipping.
I actually told Mike, because we play D&D, and I'm like, how cool would it be to be like fully immersed in like a VR?
That's probably what I would play.
And I mean, with the fire stick up the dragons.
Oh my God, I laughed so hard. He's like, well, the inside of dragons should still be able to burn. And look, his tail goes up. I'm going to just stick this like a rectal thermometer.
Well, and I think the funniest part for me was when everything froze and they're like, does the dragon get a saving throw? So it seems like you may have played 1 or 2 tabletop RPGs in your day, Dennis.
Yeah, me and some friends used to get together every Sunday and play AD&D at Norm's place. And it went from like 10:30 or so until about 4. And we just had an ongoing campaign, just going in all directions.
It was like a homebrew campaign that just somebody created.
Oh, no, it totally made up. Dave was dungeon master, and he was a bastard, though. He would... He had the dungeon carefully hidden, so we're wandering all over the landscape looking for the dungeon, and we actually never found it.
I thought it was funny about how just how disgusted Bob was with the new terms like vert and real.
Oh yeah.
Like he was just
the hip slang.
And I'm like, that would be me. Like the new terms that come out, I'm like, what? No, come on, people. Like, can we really just not be like that? And so I was wondering, is that something that drives you nuts? Is like the new terms that people are saying? I know that makes me sound like I'm
like you're 90 years old.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I'm 90 years old, but I know it drives me.
I don't even bother. Even in IT, I'm not keeping up anymore. There's something called Kubernetes, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, and I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to look it up because I'm not going to use it, and I don't care.
Yeah,
that's where I'm at. I'm just like, what are you doing? No, just stop.
Yeah. The thing is that the pace of tech change has gotten so rapid now that if something comes out and you don't jump on it right away, it could be gone before you figure out what it is. You haven't lost anything, right? You just if you just sign up for every third social media platform, you're probably okay.
Instead of talking about the past, let's talk about the future. And the Quinlins, which I kept vacillating between picturing them as like these cute little furry animals, and then Bridget would describe how they were basically like literally little terrors until they're the age of like 3 or 4, and I'm like, maybe they're not so like cute and fluffy. They just seem really angry, and like Bob started a riot by looking into a wagon. Like
it reminded me of Wookiees, because you know like how they get so they can rip your arms off if you like beat them in a game of
I don't
know. Yeah, very short Wookiees.
Yes, that's what I was kind of.
Yeah, did you draw inspiration from anywhere for the Quinlins and their language and?
No, not really. That was another case of iterative development. I started out with a basic creature, and then as I went through edits, they got more and more cranky.
We actually have a question from a fan, Dennis. I'm going to pull it up. Give me 1 second. So we interviewed an author. His name is Matthew G. Dick. He wrote a book called Seed. It's available on Amazon. And we told him we were interviewing you, so he sent us a question. So I'm just going to read it verbatim. He said, Dennis, I'm a big fan of your interviews on Literary Lushes are great. In an earlier episode, you mentioned that you've adjusted your writing style knowing that it will be an audiobook. Are you finding that after this change of writing style, are you needing to put in additional notes to Ray to give more guidance on his narration, or does Ray usually pick up on your intentions on his own? Thanks.
I do put some notes or leave some notes in the doc file that I send in for editing for Ray. Especially in the case of pronounce this way, or this has to be done in Eeyore's voice or something like that. But that's an actual example for my next book, by the way. But in terms of extra notes that he knows what's going on, no. My editor is pretty sticky about making sure that you can tell who's speaking. So we go through a couple of iterations, again, where we're just adding or deleting dialogue tags and beats as necessary to make sure that everything's clear. The thing is, if I was writing the book for audio only, I would use a lot less beats and dialogue tags, and I would just have the person's name, like in a screenplay, you just have guard, whatever he says. But for books, you can't do that. You have to have, Bob said. So essentially, we're writing for the book, but we're writing it with the idea in mind that Ray's going to be narrating it. So there can't be too many more, or there can't be too many said Bob.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I think you nailed it. It was a good happy medium.
Thank you.
The audio was very enjoyable.
There's a lot of really good like back and forth dialogue in this one too, between the Bobs and them.
Oh, the snarkiness was amazing.
Yes.
Loved it. Loved every minute of their snarkiness and just their back and forth.
And especially when Bob anytime he had to interact with Quinlan, he wasn't a fan of, like officer friendly, or when he gets interviewed.
Or even with his guppy. And he was like, what the heck? I didn't program him to be this. Is he becoming sentient? I got to check on that. And then he'd say, he's like, but I'll put that on the back burner for right now. And then Guppy would come back and say something. He's like, nope, this is getting bumped up now. I was like,
The snark.
I like the snark.
The snarkiness.
Snidely Whiplash was actually one of my favorite characters in the book.
He was just so easy to hate.
Yeah, I had fun with him.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And I so when I read Enoki Fun Guy, I don't know why, but I immediately thought of McLovin from Superbad, and just like the ridiculous last name, you know, like if you're gonna pick a last name to blend in, you wouldn't pick McLovin. And then Bob went around with the last name Fun Guy.
And then I liked how they weren't supposed to have last names, and that draws attention to yourself. And
just made me laugh even harder.
yeah.
That particular name, and I'm sure there's going to be arguments about it on fans of the Bobiverse and stuff, but that particular name I came up with when I was trolling the webs, and I came upon a website on types of fungus, mushrooms and toadstools particularly, and one of the particular breeds in this list of fungi was one called Enoki.
Oh, fun fact.
So it's a punny name.
It's a punny name, yeah.
It's a punny name.
And that's where some of my, sources are come from. It's just randomly trolling around the web, and oh, look at that! That looks interesting.
Hey,
That's probably how I would do it.
did you do any research on like biological development with like regard to the Quinlins and how they like their intelligence develops later, and how Bridget was talking about, you know, the intelligence is actually being bred out of them inadvertently?
Well, not the intelligence being bred out part. That's there was a book. I can't even remember the name right now, but it'll come back to me right after we hang up.
It's usually how it works, or right after you fall asleep.
Yeah, but the part about their intelligence developing late, that comes from something that I read on Phys.org about how the. I'm gonna have to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but one of the things that's really weird about human history is how all of a sudden, about 60 to 80,000 years ago, cave art and stuff exploded pretty much everywhere. And it came out, there wasn't enough time for people to have crossbred and, you know, moved genes across different tribes. So it couldn't be a strictly genetic thing. But this explanation that they've come up with, that there's an aspect of the brain that gets developed in childhood if you're exposed to recursive language, and if you're not exposed to it, you never get it. And it allows art, it allows abstract thinking, it allows imagination, and it's probably the reason why humanity all of a sudden just turned into this intelligent species. And I just thought, you know, certainly could happen with other alien species as well. It's just with the Quinlins, it happens late.
Yeah.
Speaking of not developing, I'm glad you didn't kill the badger.
Oh.
So this book was noticeably longer than the other books.
And we had, I mean, because in all the other books, each Bob has their own thing going on. But I feel like for the other books, for the most part, they all have the bigger issue. And on this one, there were two big issues, because we finally find out what happens to Bender.
Oh my God. I know. I was like, I'm not going to say much because I don't want to spoil for anybody who hasn't gotten to it yet. But that was very exciting that we get to find out what happens to Bender.
Which I did not think he would be where. It's so hard not to say it without saying it.
You didn't think he'd be where he is and end
Yeah,
up.
I thought he would have a more active role in that, and not a passive role, basically.
I had to go back and re-listen to when he reappears. Again, where he's just like Bob Bender.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like that. I was like, wait, what? And I like go back and I was like, oh, that's great. That was,
Yeah. Some opinions were expressed that people thought he was the administrator, but I didn't want to make that possible. That would have been too easy.
yeah.
And anyway, the point of the administrator was that he was the source, of all the trouble.
I knew there was something up with Hugh. The whole time, I'm like, there's something.
You did not.
I was like, there's
You
just,
did not.
he just seems too willing to help all of a sudden. Like, there's just something odd, but I can never figure out like what it was. And then I would like very carefully read, like anytime Bob was like, this is weird, I'm like, okay, let me like go back and reread. And I couldn't figure it out, but I'm like, this doesn't make sense that all of a sudden he wants to like help out, and all of a sudden he's gonna transfer himself to like Bob's unit so he could be closer. I'm like, because he originally was like, it's a fun experiment and it's not fun anymore, so we're out. And then he's like, just kidding, we're back. So, but his intentions, I guess, were good. He did,
I did like Bridget going on the trip with them and having that different opinion from the Bobs, the main Bobs.
Oh, poor thing with
and
3 times.
But having to deal, and then she, oh man, and they were like laughing, go, oh, Howard must have showed her these things because like, that would have been something she'd known, and her rolling her eyes, and I'm like, okay, but like, doesn't Howard do this? And obviously you like that, and so
yeah, but times 3. Imagine 3 rays.
No,
Yeah.
No, God help me when my kid is born.
I actually really like the golden rule, the silver rule, and I forget what the third one was, the bronze rule?
Iron rule. Yeah.
And because when I first read the golden rule, I was like, wait, like, because I read it as to be more of like a selfish perspective, and then when Teresa was explaining it, I'm like, oh, this actually makes like a lot.
I really liked
sense.
that. I need to write those out and like have them.
Yeah. So was that something you came up with off the cuff? Were you inspired by something, or?
I ran across something called the platinum rule on the internet, which is basically the golden rule. And I just thought, well, it describes 3 different levels of morality. And she just went with it, and made it a part of their society, a part of their culture, I guess.
Which I was going to say, it's funny because all the children grow up learning those rules, but yet they all just beat the crap out of each other at the drop of a hat. So clearly they don't listen.
But they also, I felt like I thought it was interesting when they were like, back up, like he called back up, and like random people came to help, and they were like chasing him. And I was like, oh, so I'm like, but they're so worried about people stealing, but they also like, but they're like, maybe they just like fighting, and that's why then someone like yells back up, they're like, ooh, fight! And then just
fight.
But I was like, oh, but they kind of like, protect each other too. But then that could again be just because protecting someone means that they get to
beat the crap out of someone else.
Yeah, I think the Quinlans are very tribal.
They were fun. I enjoyed them a lot.
I know. It'll be interesting to, how they'd interact with like the paths, for example. I feel like that wouldn't go over very well if they ever made it that far.
Yeah, well, there's 2 species with a tendency to want to solve their problems by fighting. Actually, 3 if you include humans, I guess.
I was just going to say, we could probably include ourselves in that,
Yeah. Things are going to get interesting in the UFS.
So does that mean, Dennis, there's going to be at least 1 more book? Sounds like it.
Oh, yeah. Each book that I put out generates at least 3 or 4 different possible forks. So it's just going to keep proliferating.
That's so awesome.
It's going to be like Star Wars, but cool.
Yeah. Like, and I know we've talked to a few authors, and a lot of them say about how your books inspired them. And like they're like, yeah, we know you talked to Dennis E. Taylor. That's so cool. And
we're like, yeah, we know. We're very cool.
We're like, and some of them say like they take some like inspiration from your books to help them come up with some of their ideas. And then we were reading Ready Player 2 just recently, and some of their stuff that I think even during our podcast, we were like, it reminded us of the Bobiverse.
One of the things that was hammered into me was that a person using a piece of technology, or like a phone, just for instance, isn't going to be sitting there using it, thinking about the technology that goes into the phone. They're going to say, phone, press button, talk to wife. It's ubiquitous, or it's a novelty. I mean, you run into a spaceship out in space, it's a novelty. You'll describe it. You use your phone, it's just part of the landscape.
So Dennis, I know every time we talk to you, we hope and pray that you have an update, and I know COVID probably slowed things down, but any updates on a film or TV adaptation?
Nothing specific. The current contract expires March or April, somewhere in there. So they have to either cough up something or renew the contract for another 18 months, which,
Right.
costs money. So something's got to break.
I know. I'm like patiently waiting for it, because I'm like, oh man, that'd be like so awesome to see.
Yeah. Well, after watching Upload on Amazon Prime, I'm just thinking, my God, the Bobiverse should be able to work.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
I mean, and you get the right actor to play Bob, and it's golden, man. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, the actor, and I don't know his name, but the actor who's the central character on Upload, he did a really good job of that.
So we've taken plenty of your time, more than we could ever ask. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody. So our next episode is going up February 18th, and we are going to be reading Into the Crooked Place by Alexandra Christo. It is a young adult fantasy novel, and we are also going to be having an author spotlight segment, the first one of 2021 in that episode, and it's going to be with Matthew Dick, the author of the book Seed, and you can get that on Amazon. So be sure to tune in and listen to that. Should be a good one. And with that, we say, stay lively with your libations. Us and our cool water bottles.